a lot more appealing than the scorched earth.
So it's pretty bad out here.
This is bad. This pasture's bad. It's one of them areas that did not catch any rain.
The ground is splitting open under the Texas sun. Fields that were once green are now dust brown, and tractors sit idle in soil that can no longer grow anything. A massive drought has ripped through Texas farmland, pushing crops, cattle, and entire rural communities to the brink and forcing the governor into emergency action mode. With the land turning to dust and water running out, is this the moment Texas realizes the crisis is bigger than anyone expected?
Supplemental feeding.
Because there's not enough grass.
Not enough grass, and it's so cotton picking dry.
Trefny knows droughts and he knows floods. His family has raised cattle and grown crops in Weimar for 5 generations.
When you look at what's happening in Texas right now, it's hard not to feel like the state is standing at the edge of something serious. This isn't just another dry spell people complain about over coffee. Texas is dealing with ongoing extreme and, in some areas, exceptional drought conditions that have dragged on for months and, in some regions, even years. Huge stretches of land across West Texas and the southern plains have barely seen meaningful rainfall, and the ground is paying the price. Fields that should be green and productive are cracked, pale, and dusty, and that reality has pushed the situation all the way up to the governor's office. When leaders start renewing emergency declarations again and again, it's usually a sign that things are not under control.
We are in the most severe drought on the gauged record.
What really makes this drought stand out is how visible it has become, even from space. NASA has been tracking dust storms and parched landscapes across West Texas and the southern plains, and the images are striking. From above, you can see brown and tan patches where crops should be growing and long plumes of dust blowing across the land. These aren't just dramatic pictures for headlines. They show how dry the soil has become and how easily it's being lifted into the air. When topsoil starts blowing away, that's not just a weather problem anymore. That's land losing its ability to grow food. The lack of rain combined with relentless heat has turned what should be healthy soil into something closer to powder. High temperatures speed up evaporation, so whatever little moisture does fall disappears quickly. Without steady rain to bind the soil together, fields dry out completely. Over time, the structure of the soil breaks down, and once that happens, it doesn't take much wind to send it swirling into the sky. This is how bad weather slowly transforms into a full-blown agricultural crisis. Water sources shrink, crops wither, and the systems people rely on for food and income start to fail one by one.
And primarily because it's thirsty. The pastures, we got grass in them, but they're burning up.
Texas rancher David Henderson is struggling to feed his cows.
For farmers, the situation is brutal. Crops are failing before they even have a chance to grow. In some areas, farmers haven't planted at all because they know the seeds won't survive. In others, young plants sprout and then die under the heat, leaving behind empty rows and wasted investment. One farmer described standing at the edge of his field, boots sinking slightly into loose dirt, watching dust blow where corn should have been waist high. He said it felt like watching a season disappear in slow motion, knowing there was nothing he could do to stop it. Ranchers are facing a different but equally painful struggle. Grazing lands are deteriorating fast, turning from grass-covered pastures into dry, bare ground. Without grass, cattle have nothing to eat. Ranchers are being forced to buy expensive feed or sell off parts of their herds just to survive. Some have talked about hauling water long distances because ponds and stock tanks have dried up. Imagine waking up every day worrying not just about your income, but about whether your animals will have enough water to make it through the week. That's the reality for many Texas ranchers right now. This is where the governor's reaction comes into focus. The repeated drought disaster declarations aren't just paperwork. They're a signal that state leadership sees the scale of the damage and understands that local solutions aren't enough. These declarations open the door to emergency measures and allow the state to work more closely with federal agencies. They also reflect a kind of urgency that feels a lot like panic, because the situation keeps getting worse instead of better.
Now we hit August, and this is normally our hottest, driest time of the year. We may not get much moisture, if any, this month, and that's something that you got to plan for. And the only thing I can think of, sometime it calls for selling cows.
The federal government has stepped in as well. The USDA has declared many Texas counties as disaster areas due to drought, which makes farmers and ranchers eligible for emergency loans and relief programs. For some families, this assistance is the only thing keeping them afloat. It helps cover losses, pay bills, and plan for the next season, even though there's no guarantee the weather will cooperate. Still, loans and aid are a lifeline, not a solution. They help people survive the crisis, but they don't bring the rain back. What's especially heartbreaking are the small human moments that rarely make it into official reports. Farmers walking their fields in silence, kicking at dry clods of earth that crumble in their hands. Ranchers standing by empty water tanks, checking the sky out of habit even when they know there's no rain in the forecast. Dust blowing across land that has been farmed for generations, as if erasing the work of decades in a single season. These stories give the drought a face, and they explain why the mood across rural Texas feels so heavy. The economic impact is spreading beyond farms and ranches. When agriculture suffers, local businesses feel it too. Equipment dealers, feed stores, truckers, and small-town shops all depend on a healthy farming economy. As losses pile up, spending slows down, and communities that already operate on thin margins feel the squeeze. Water shortages also raise concerns for cities and towns, forcing officials to consider restrictions and long-term planning that once seemed unnecessary. All of this helps explain why the governor's office appears to be scrambling. This drought isn't isolated, and it's not short-lived. It's reshaping landscapes, threatening food production, and testing the limits of water systems across the state. When fields turn to dust, it's a warning sign that something deeper is wrong. It forces leaders to confront hard questions about preparedness, water management, and how Texas will handle a future that may be hotter and drier than the past. At the end of the day, this drought is more than a weather story. It's about people watching their livelihoods dry up, about land that can no longer support what it once did, and about a state government under pressure to respond to a crisis that keeps expanding. Texas has faced tough conditions before, but the combination of extreme heat, prolonged dryness, and visible land degradation makes this moment feel different. As farmers, ranchers, and communities wait for relief, one thing is clear. When the fields turn to dust, everyone feels the impact from the ground up. When people hear the phrase "Governor of Texas panics," it can sound dramatic, almost emotional, like someone losing their cool. But what's happening right now is much more serious and much more telling than a moment of fear. The real panic shows up in paperwork, proclamations, and emergency powers being activated again and again. Over the past months, the governor of Texas has repeatedly amended and renewed a statewide drought disaster declaration, openly acknowledging that this crisis is not easing up. Each renewal is basically the state admitting, this is still bad, and it's not under control yet. You don't keep extending emergency declarations unless the situation keeps escalating. These drought disaster declarations, posted and updated through official state channels like texas.gov, are not symbolic gestures. They unlock real authority and real tools. By renewing them, the governor is saying the drought has moved beyond local weather trouble and into the territory of a statewide emergency. The land is drying out, water supplies are under stress, and agriculture is taking hit after hit. This is the clearest signal yet that state leadership sees this not as a handful of counties struggling, but as a full-blown disaster that affects Texas as a whole.
It's hot, it's dry, it's the same as somebody being out in the heat. It takes your appetite.
While this year's drought hasn't been as bad as last year's, Texas state climatologist John Nielsen Gammon predicts extreme heat will become the norm.
What many people don't realize is how much power comes with these proclamations. When a drought disaster declaration is active, the state can use all available resources to respond. That includes mobilizing state agencies, redirecting funding, and coordinating across departments that normally don't work this closely together. In some cases, it even allows certain regulations to be suspended if they slow down emergency response. That could mean faster approvals for water transfers, emergency repairs to infrastructure, or temporary rule changes to help farmers and ranchers survive the crisis. These aren't small moves. They show urgency and, frankly, pressure. This is where the idea of panic really makes sense. It's not about fear on someone's face. It's about action. Panic at the government level looks like emergency declarations being extended month after month. It looks like state agencies being told to drop normal routines and focus on drought response. It looks like constant communication with federal partners because the state knows it can't handle the scale of the problem alone. That kind of response tells you leaders are deeply concerned about how bad things have become.
Governor Greg Abbott signed what he calls the largest water investment in state history, a $20 billion commitment over 20 years.
One of the most important parts of this response is outreach to the federal government, especially the U.S. Department of Agriculture. As drought conditions worsened, the USDA stepped in by designating many Texas counties as disaster areas. That designation matters a lot for farmers and ranchers because it makes them eligible for emergency assistance and disaster loans. These loans can help cover crop losses, pay operating costs, or keep family operations afloat when income dries up along with the land. For many producers, this support isn't about making a profit, it's about surviving long enough to see another season. From the state's point of view, coordinating with the USDA is a lifeline. It spreads the financial burden and brings in resources Texas simply can't provide on its own. When the governor's office pushes for federal recognition and aid, it's a clear sign that the drought has exceeded what state programs were designed to handle. Again, that's not something leaders do lightly. It reflects the reality on the ground, where fields are turning to dust and water sources are under real threat. At the same time, these emergency measures are opening the door to serious governance debates. Water allocation is one of the biggest and most sensitive issues. When water becomes scarce, who gets priority? Cities, farms, power generation, or environmental needs? These are not easy questions, and drought forces them into the spotlight. Farmers need water to grow food, cities need water to function, and rivers and ecosystems need water to survive. Balancing those demands during extreme drought is a political and practical challenge that no one wants to face, but everyone must.
Senate Bill 7 expands a list of projects eligible for state's water fund, and House Joint Resolution 7 helps fund those projects, dedicating $1 billion annually.
Infrastructure debates are also heating up. Drought exposes weaknesses in water storage, delivery systems, and aging infrastructure. Some lawmakers and officials argue that Texas needs to invest heavily in new reservoirs, pipelines, or water recycling systems to prepare for a drier future. Others worry about costs, environmental impact, or whether these solutions can be built fast enough to matter. The current crisis is pushing these conversations from theory into urgency. When emergency declarations keep getting renewed, it becomes harder to delay long-term planning. There's also a growing discussion about whether Texas needs a broader strategy shift. For decades, the state has operated with the assumption that droughts come and go. But prolonged extreme conditions are challenging that idea. Some leaders are asking whether water conservation rules should be stricter, whether farming practices need to change, or whether future development should be limited by water availability. These are uncomfortable topics, especially in a state that values growth and independence, but drought has a way of forcing reality into the conversation. All of this explains why the governor's repeated actions matter so much. Renewing and amending drought disaster declarations sends a message to agencies, lawmakers, and the public that this is not business as usual. It tells everyone that the state is in emergency mode and that tough decisions may be coming. It also signals to farmers, ranchers, and rural communities that the government sees their struggle and is trying, within its power, to respond. In the end, this situation shows that panic at the leadership level is not chaos. It's urgency backed by authority. It's emergency powers being used, resources being mobilized, and federal help being pulled in because the scale of the drought demands it. The land turning to dust is not just an environmental issue, it's a governance challenge, an economic threat, and a warning about the future. And when the governor keeps renewing those declarations, it's a quiet but powerful admission that Texas is facing one of its toughest drought battles in years, with no easy end in sight. When you really sit down and look at what this massive drought is doing to Texas, the numbers and headlines only tell part of the story. The real impact shows up in everyday conversations across rural towns, in worried phone calls between farmers, and in quiet moments when people look at their land and wonder how much more it can take. Losses to crops and cattle production are stacking up fast, and they're not just hurting individual farmers, they're shaking the foundation of entire rural economies that depend on agriculture to survive.
The Texas Water Development Board warns if investments are not made, the state will face severe water shortages as the population continues to grow.
Crop losses are one of the most visible and painful parts of this drought. Fields that were planted with hope are now being abandoned halfway through the season. Corn, cotton, sorghum, and hay crops have been hit especially hard in many areas. Without enough rain, plants either never sprout or burn up under the intense heat before they can mature. Farmers have talked about watching their crops turn yellow and brittle weeks earlier than normal. Some say they already know this season is a total loss, but they still walk their fields every day out of habit, as if something might magically change. Cattle producers are facing a different kind of disaster, but it's just as serious. When pastures dry up, there's no grass to graze, and cattle still need to eat. That means ranchers are being forced to buy hay and supplemental feed at much higher prices, assuming they can even find it. Hay itself is in short supply because hay fields are also suffering from the drought. Some ranchers have made the heartbreaking decision to sell off part of their herds early, not because they want to, but because they can't afford to keep them fed and watered. Selling cattle under pressure usually means lower prices, which adds to the financial pain. Water is another huge part of the problem, and it's becoming more expensive by the day. In areas where ponds, wells, and stock tanks have dried up, ranchers are hauling water in by truck. That's not cheap. Fuel costs, equipment wear, and time all add up quickly. For crop farmers, irrigation costs are rising as wells have to run longer and harder to pull up diminishing groundwater. Pumps burn more electricity, maintenance costs increase, and in some cases, wells simply can't keep up anymore. Every extra dollar spent on water is a dollar taken away from already thin margins. All of this pressure is putting rural economies under serious strain. Agriculture isn't just one business in these communities, it's the backbone. When farmers lose crops and ranchers cut back herds, local businesses feel it almost immediately. Feed stores sell less, equipment dealers delay orders, repair shops see fewer customers, and even grocery stores and diners notice fewer people spending money. One small-town shop owner said it feels like the whole community is holding its breath, waiting to see who will make it through the year and who won't. The emotional toll is just as heavy as the financial one. Farmers are scared about the next season because drought doesn't reset neatly with the calendar. If the soil is damaged and water reserves are low, even a decent rain might not be enough to fix everything. Many producers are asking themselves tough questions. Should they plant again next year or cut back? Should they invest more money when the risk feels higher than ever? These are not abstract worries. They affect real families trying to decide how much more they can risk. Communities are also deeply worried about water supply, not just for agriculture, but for daily life. As reservoirs drop and wells struggle, towns are starting to think about restrictions and conservation in more serious ways. People are checking local water updates like weather reports, hoping levels don't fall any further. In some areas, residents are already being asked to limit outdoor watering or prepare for tighter rules. When water becomes uncertain, it changes how people think about growth, development, and even staying in the area long term. Local reactions tell the story better than any statistic. One farmer shared that his family has worked the same land for generations, and he's never seen it this dry for this long. He said the hardest part isn't just losing money, it's the feeling of letting down the land itself. Another rancher talked about his kids asking why they had to sell some of their cattle, and how hard it was to explain that sometimes you have to make painful choices just to survive. These moments don't show up in official reports, but they define the crisis. Even people who aren't directly involved in farming feel the tension. School districts worry about declining enrollment as families consider moving away. Local governments worry about shrinking tax bases just as the need for services increases. Churches and community groups are stepping in to help neighbors who are struggling, organizing support, and sharing resources where they can. There's a strong sense of community, but also a shared fear that this drought is testing everyone at once.
For several more decades, this sort of heat will become normal in the summertime for Texas. That, in addition, means that the heat extremes will be that much hotter and that much more severe.
All of this helps explain why the governor's response feels urgent and intense. When fields turn to dust, the damage spreads far beyond the fence line. Crop losses reduce food supply and income. Cattle losses ripple through meat markets and local economies. Rising water costs strain already stressed operations. And when rural communities weaken, the effects eventually reach cities too. This is why the drought isn't just a weather story or an agricultural problem. It's a statewide economic and social challenge. What makes the situation even more difficult is the uncertainty. Farmers and ranchers are used to dealing with risk, but this level of prolonged dryness makes planning almost impossible. You can't budget for rain that never comes. You can't predict how long water will last when reservoirs keep dropping. And you can't easily recover from losses when each season starts with less than the one before. That uncertainty weighs on people every single day. In the end, the massive drought has turned Texas fields into dust in more ways than one. It has stripped away crops, reduced herds, drained water supplies, and shaken rural economies to their core. It has left farmers scared for the next season and communities worried about whether their water will last. And it has pushed state leadership into emergency mode because the consequences of doing nothing are simply too big to ignore. When you listen to the people living through it, you realize this isn't about panic for headlines. It's about survival, resilience, and the fight to hold on until the land can breathe again.